Is this the first zine? The longest continuing history of zines starts with science fiction fanzines. The first one, pictured here, was published in Chicago by Raymond Arthur Palmer and the Science Correspondence Club, according to the New York University Archives. There have been many sci-fi fanzines over the years. We might say that these fanzines can be defined by the fact that they were not produced commercially by professional printers, and they were not produced to make a profit. They were produced for the purpose of communicating. Or is this the first zine? One way to define zines is to give them a history, and to talk about what is common to all of the things encompassed by that history. The famous tract Common Sense, which helped inspire the American Revolution, has been called a zine, for example, by Joe Biel and Bill Brent in their book, Make a Zine. The history of zines can be extended at will by searching out analogs to zines from the past and calling them zines. The broadside was an analog to zines because it was cheaply printed and the content of broadsides varied. However, they were produced for the purpose of making a profit or for advertising. This broadside story begins, a strange and wonderful relation concerning a mermaid that was seen and spoke with on the cliff of Cromarty. This broadside probably dates from 1760, according to the National Library of Scotland. Old-timey chapbooks were similarly cheap but also produced for profit. Chapbooks are small, cheap productions of a popular nature purchased either at booksellers in towns or from chapmen and peddlers in rural areas. Intended for people with little money to spare, they were generally printed on poor paper, often using old and battered type in woodblocks, according to the Victoria and Albert Museum. Modern-day chapbooks are much more zine-like, but chapbooks tend to be distinguished from zines, at least by the people who make chapbooks and who call their productions chapbooks. These people tend to focus on literary production, especially poetry. The chapbook community is part of the poetry community, but also connected to the zine community. Let me supply an interesting quotation for you. One of the great things about Chicago and the open mics and poetry events and shows I go to is that poets, musicians, visual artists, cartoonists, comics, performance artists, actors, playwrights, page poets, spoken word artists, storytellers, academics and college students, working stiffs and retirees are all connecting with one another and supporting each other at these various events. This is from an interview with Elizabeth Harper. She goes on to define chapbooks, and I think her definition gets at the essential looseness of criteria which we should also apply to zines. If someone wants to call it a chapbook, that's fine with me. Some people define it as a certain number of pages stapled or tied together, but I've seen so many different ways to do it. At the Little Indie Press Festival, Carly Gomez and Levi Sherman had a deck of cards with images of collages made from wallpaper scraps on one side and short prose poems on the other. But they also have a LED display that moves around Chicago showing poems, so those are chapbooks too. And I've seen loose individual poems in an envelope. Paul Ryan's Destruction Instructions are poems with color images printed on glossy trifold brochures and then packaged all together in a white box. If someone wants to call a CD a chapbook, I think that's fine too. Here's a table of chapbooks at the New York City Chapbook Festival. The NYC-CUNY Chapbook Festival celebrates the chapbook as a work of art and as a medium for alternative and emerging writers and publishers. This is a quotation from the centerforthehumanities.org website. And here's the first flyer for the Minneapolis Zine Fest in 2004, which later became the Twin Cities Zine Fest. If we really want to try hard to distinguish zines from other zine-like productions, we can say zines are or have been, number one, primarily DIY in many or most ways. 2, not produced primarily for making money, but for communicating. And 3, not defined by discipline or topic such as poetry. But even this set of distinctions may be too pedantic and too restrictive. We can also say zines are not defined by their production, even though mimeographs and copy machines have been very important to the production of zines. 20th century zines might have owed a lot to the mimeograph and later the copy machine, but recent zines are produced by a range of technologies. We could also say that zines have been continuously reinvented by people doing it themselves, but most zines have not been invented in a void. Many zines, or probably most, have been inspired by other zines. And finally, I should point out that the DIY aspect of zines is why their co-optation by authorities such as universities, art museums, and libraries might be problematic, although this trend has steadily increased over the past decade. There has been a huge variety of types or topics of zines, although one might tend to think of zines as being defined by certain topics and movements, because zines were so important to those movements. So there have been sci-fi zines, punk zines, riot girl zines, feminist zines, queercore zines, transgender zines, comic book zines, role-playing game zines, and many, many, many more kinds of zines. Just for example, Sniff and Glue, the first punk fanzine, was produced by Mark Perry in July 1976, a few days after seeing U.S. punk band The Ramones for the first time at the Roundhouse in London, according to the British Library. And the origins of the Riot Girl movement can be found in Jigsaw, started by Toby Vale in 1988 in Olympia, Washington. Vale, a musician, wrote mostly about the punk and feminist scenes in the Pacific Northwest. According to Girls to the Front, after reading a 5-page article on gender called Boxes in Jigsaw, Kathleen Hanna was inspired to send Vale, who would later become her bandmate in Bikini Kill, some interviews she had done with musicians while on the road. After Hale and Hanna met, the two soon came upon a vision for a movement that Vale titled Revolution Girl Style Now, according to FlavorWire. The Minnesota State University Mankato collection tends to be focused on just one type of zine, which we might as well call the art zine. In some ways, the art zine is more like a chapbook than a zine, I think, because of the focus on art and design production, just as chapbooks are focused on literary production. Art and design zines have their own history, not looking back to sci-fi zines or other types of zines, but instead looking back toward art and design history. Or actually, art zines don't have to look back at all. They can function in complete ignorance of history and often get away with it if they aren't cliché. Instead, it might be better to say that art zines can tend to occupy the same space as previous art and design printed works, at least in some ways, maybe especially artist books, but also including postcard projects, poster projects, and other printed material projects. If we think back on how we provisionally define zines overall, the definition fails here. Some art zines might be DIY, but they also tend to have higher production values, which doesn't necessarily mean they're all pretty, because production values can be conceptual. They also might be intended for the purpose of sale or to demonstrate an artist's or a designer's work. Anyway, I'm not going to try to define art zines any further than this. Instead, I encourage you to look at the zines in our collection and draw your own conclusions. If you want to find the zines on your own, you can look them up on the library website as the Zine Collection. The zines themselves are kept in bins in the periodicals area of the library. The reason they are kept in bins and not displayed more nicely is because we want them to be easy for your professors to check out, so they can easily bring them to class for you to see more closely. These are what we call curricular resources to inform your classroom learning. The zine bins are not available for students to check out, unfortunately. That's because we want them to be available for your professors when they need them. You can, however, use the zines within the library whenever you want. Inside the bins, the zines are nicely organized by folder. Feel free to take them out and peruse them. And please try to put the zines back in the order you found them. I hope you enjoy the collection. It was started by the faculty of the Art and Design Department in collaboration with the library to help you as you proceed on your own art and design projects.